My name is Dr. Peter Knapp. I'm an air quality scientist, just having finished a PhD in air quality at Imperial College in London. And I'm starting this project across Europe trying to look at the effect of wildfires that are in all of southern European countries from Greece to Portugal. And I'm spending 3 months going across these countries and finding out the causes, the consequences, the direct action and effect of community on these wildfires. That is the one thing, well, one of the few things which everyone agrees on. And in the case of the eucalyptus, when we have all these enormous fires, the air quality is really reduced from the smoke of these trees when they burn. The smoke is not just local, it travels thousands of kilometers and it becomes an international problem. At the moment, we've got wildfire smoke in the air from Canada. So we know that when you have air pollution that comes from forest fires, it goes international. It becomes an international problem. So if Portugal is saying, "Hey, look, we're providing the pulp and paper for Europe," they're also providing the air pollution for Europe. And until we can make that link much easier for people to understand, the problem will continue. Now, what does that air pollution do? Generally, there are two types of air pollution. You have gases and you have particles. When you burn things like biomass from trees, you produce a lot of particles. Those particles can be large or very small. If they're very small, they travel further. If they're very small enough, they can go through the eyes. They can go through the nose and into the brain. They go into the lungs and into the blood. They can go all over the body, and that leads to health consequences such as strokes, dementia, diabetes, asthma, allergies. And until we can look at these particles and stop the source of these particles, the health consequences will continue. But it's not just, of course, forest fires, it's the airport in the middle of Lisbon. It's the ultrafine particles that come out of these aeroplanes that leave every 90 seconds out of that city airport, that is raining down on the millions of people that live there. The air pollution is everywhere, but when you're living in rural communities, especially in valleys like this, you get air pollution from wood burning because people don't have the subsidies for heat pumps. You get the air pollution from the forest fires, the eucalyptus burning. And that all hugs in the valley. It stays in there like a thick blanket, especially during the winter. And the people who live in these valleys, they will suffer the health consequences that I mentioned before. They will have higher rates of cancers, dementia, strokes, diabetes. Now that study needs to be done, and tomorrow I'm planning to go to Porto to speak to academics exactly about that. When people are burning agricultural waste, especially when it's green, it produces the worst kind of pollution because it's still got moisture in it. I understand in Portugal that wood burning is a big part of society, unfortunately, still. And people will know that when they dry wood, it's better than burning wet wood. Now, when you burn agricultural waste that's still green, you're producing a lot of smoke. And that smoke is much more toxic. So if there are many people burning this kind of waste, especially near old people's homes, places where vulnerable people live, it could be near schools, what happens? What are the health consequences of these people who are living in these places? In old people's homes, they have a lot of health problems, and maybe they're not attributing their worsening asthma to the burning of the agricultural waste. But it will be exacerbating that, there is no doubt about it. What I'd recommend is that they put some kind of monitors in these places for particle monitors, that you can buy them very cheaply. And then you can say, well, when we're burning this stuff, this number goes up to this number. And that should always be below 5. For example, PM 2.5 should be under 5 micrograms per cubic meter is the World Health Organization guideline. That is there. Now, if these old people's homes have these cheap monitors, they can say, hey, look, the air pollution is going up way more than it should be because you're burning that stuff. They can make a causal link, and they know that if that number of the PM 2.5 goes up, there is an associated mortality risk. They need to be able to put these two things together. What I would say then, especially for older people and people who don't have a lot of money, is that the government subsidy should come along to these people to say, we're going to provide some shredders for you, so you don't have to burn your waste. But more than that, there is a set of dominoes here. The domino for subsidies and for government support has to come from public pressure. Public pressure comes from knowledge and data. So that, I would say, would be the first step, to get the data, to build the pressure to give the government, and with the solution. So you're saying the solution to this is to provide subsidies to provide these people with shredders in the same way that they do in other parts of northern Portugal. Especially when there are other people doing it, they have no escape. They can't say, well, we can't do that, because you can say, hey, look, your neighbours are doing it, and there's a competition here between councils. That needs to be played upon. So we're especially with the fires, we're losing a lot of topsoil as well. Yeah. And the consequences of losing topsoil is that you get greater flooding risk, because the water from the rains doesn't sit in the soil. It ends up in the valleys, and we will see in the coming decades much greater flooding in places like this, because companies like Navigator are ruining the soil. There is no way for that water to be absorbed, and it will sit in the valleys and it will flood them. Who is to blame for that? It is companies like Navigator who put their CEOs into government, and it's the government's fault for letting that happen. Also, the government are not listening to the public to say we don't want that to happen, because they make money out of that. They can see GDP rising. And really, what does that mean for people here? GDP rise today will mean floods tomorrow. GDP rise today will mean food shortages, mass migration tomorrow. I think when people are trying to push for laws to regulate these big companies, that is one step. However, these companies, I think, are very clever in that they count on people not knowing the law. They will continue to do things that are illegal because the people don't know that. And it's only until they can be held accountable does that law mean anything. So it's one thing to pass a law, ecocide, whatever. It's one thing to put a law to say that this area should have no eucalyptus in it. But until they're held accountable for that law means nothing. And that means that certain individuals have to be resourced enough to look into the law, to hold these companies to account, and to not be individuals, but to have groups of people going to the people who are in charge of these laws and saying, hey, look, they are breaking this. And of course, in places like Portugal, when you destroy something, when you break a law, the consequence is, well, you've done it anyway, you might as well carry on. And if that culture is maintained, then these laws really won't mean anything. So what else have we got to our fingertips? It's direct action as well. So law is one aspect of it, but direct action has a valuable part to play too. Now, we may not have enough people in Portugal to be resourced enough for that. But until these people really see the consequences of the air pollution, the destruction of the natural world, the continual floods and so on, with the activities of these companies, and I'm sure many people do, they may also feel very disempowered. And this is another aspect of the hangover of the fascist regime. People's empowerment was stripped from them, and what are they left with? They feel that sense of disempowerment that I think is lingering on until 2024. Now, how do you get that empowerment back? I'm not sure. Various community outreach projects that focus on empowerment, like direct action, in a similar way that happened in the UK with Extinction Rebellion. Something like that may help to shift the tide here. I went to one of the biomass burning plants in Portugal with an air quality monitor. So this is a cheap mobile thing. And on one side of the power station where the wind was coming from, the value was about 8. Now remember that the WHO level is about 5. It's still above, but it's in the right similar ballpark. The other side where the wind was blowing, I measured it was over 30. So that's coming straight out of this power station. I was able to see the various tree trunks being fed into this machine. And these are full round trees, right? So this is not just pellets of gathered from the forest floor or residual biomass that comes out of various production methods. This is where trees are grown specifically to burn for electricity. What is the carbon cost to that? Well, the carbon may be drawn from the atmosphere to produce that tree, but there's more than that. It takes a lot of nutrients from the soil. When that tree is grown and you chop it down and you burn it, that carbon then goes back out into the atmosphere. But what else has happened to that? Well, it's the destruction of the biodiversity of the landscape. It's the destruction of the soils. It's sucking up all of the water that's in the soil, producing the droughts. It's not just carbon we have to consider, but everything else that comes with it. What about the air pollution that's created from burning this thing? Where does it go? Are they filtering that? Are they monitoring that? Or is it up to people like us to go there and measure it and say, hey, you're polluting the atmosphere? If companies are not held to account and there are no laws to prevent them from doing that, then they will. But as I said before, even if there are laws, the public need to be aware of that to hold them to account. We should be paying our taxes so we don't have to do that. We should be paying our taxes so the government are holding these companies to account. But when the companies and the government are the same, obviously they're going to continue to pollute.
Yeah.
We need to be able to separate business from government, and they should not be any crossover. They shouldn't be allowed. CEOs from these companies should not be allowed to work in government. Government officials should not be allowed to work for these polluting industries.
Yeah.
When you're burning fossil fuels, you're producing the carbon dioxide, of course, but when you're burning biomass, you're producing carbon dioxide and everything else.
Yeah.
And the air pollution that you produce when you're burning coal has sulfur dioxides and nitrogen dioxides and those kinds of pollutants. But when you're burning pellets, or when you're making pellets out of trees, you're producing a lot of air pollution, formaldehyde and so on. An example in the UK with Drax. Drax being one of the villains in a James Bond film is in real life a villain. And they are getting wood from ancient forests in Canada and the United States and from Portugal to make into pellets to ship around from all over the world at great expense of fossil fuels, using the worst kinds of fuel, heavy bunker oil it's called, to produce green energy to burn in Yorkshire in the UK. At great expense to the natural world, burning huge amount of fossil fuels, creating air pollution, taking all of the soil out, taking all the water out. The hard question that we are not asking ourselves isn't where should we get the energy from? The hard question is, should we be reducing the energy we're using? And until we can change our lifestyles away from this high consumption lifestyle, which is pushed on us through advertising and capitalism, until we can break away from that, we will always be in a situation where we're trying to find energy using the least bad means. And the new weapon is the green leaf symbol. When you see the green leaf on something, you know that it's going to be trying to manipulate you into thinking that it's better for the environment. And until we can put a regulation on what that green leaf symbol means, it means nothing at all. In fact, what it means to people is that's probably worse than fossil fuels in many cases. They manipulate people because we know that there's an issue with the environment. We know that there's an emergency, a climate emergency. So we're all looking for solutions, but the solutions aren't coming from reducing consumption. The solutions are coming from which business is going to be able to exploit you next using the green leaf symbol. And governments are gullible. Governments are sucking up all of that green wash that's piling out of business to say, how are we going to survive using this green leaf symbol? If you try to book a flight, it'll say, yeah, you can buy this economical one because it's got a green leaf symbol on it. We're going to offset. What does offsetting mean? We're going to produce more eucalyptus in Portugal, right? What do all these offsets mean? It's just another part of the way that the capitalist model is trying to manipulate you in the context of a climate emergency. It's not about reducing consumption, because that is degrowth. That is something where business loses. Many businesses lose. So they're defending their business as much as they can.
So
I think the degrowth has got lots of very highly valuable aspects to it. I think the name is problematic. When people see the word degrowth, whatever their understanding, they think that that's a bad thing. I think that needs a rebrand because it is growth. It's a growth of a relationship with nature, and it's a growth with communities and relationships with each other. It's a growth in community. It's a growth in relationships with nature. It's a growth in relationships with everyone, the natural world. That's what degrowth means. It's a growth, but it's in a different way. And until we can remarket it in that way, I don't think it's going to work. When people are listening to this and wondering what they can do themselves, I think one of the biggest things is to find a community of people who are like-minded. I think a big aspect of the problem we have is that everyone's compartmentalized, isolated, lonely. People all feel like they're on their own fighting this great fight on their own. First step, find other people who think the same way, who have that fight in them, but they don't know how to use that energy. Everyone's trying to fight the problem on their own, and it's not going to work. First step, find a community. Second step, use that massive voice that you have to push for change. Know the law, hold companies to account. And councils, right? So people like this, people need, these councils need to hear the voices of many, not of individuals. Because they won't care if they hear it from an individual, but they will care if it comes from a group. One of the weapons of the fossil fuel industry and other harmful industries is to say there's no hope. That they'll feed the narrative in to say, hey look, the world's really bad, we'll just have to adapt to it, because that's the way that they keep going. Now that feeds into people's psyche, that they feel disempowered, but they're also getting the message that there's no hope. Now what's the antidote narrative to that? That is coming from a sense of community, I think. It's where you're speaking with like-minded people, that you don't feel that you're on your own. I think in the next 20 or 30 years, if we suck up the narrative that there's no hope, that we will have huge problems. We will have huge problems anyway, but there's a spectrum here of how huge that problem is going to be. To minimize the magnitude of that problem means acting now. It means acting today. That means getting into groups to magnify the voice of a few people to push for change today, because that means that you're going to change the curve of what's going to happen in those 20 or 30 years. We know it's going to be bad, but how bad depends on what we do today.